And with that, they cannot purchase buildings the way they purchase buildings in Riyadh or Dubai. They need more tax planning. So again, tax is a theme there. And of course, the biggest issue facing the GCC that today we are facing, and the Middle East in general, we have reached the third generation. The first generation built the wealth in the 50s, 60s. Second generations were in the 90s. And now we see the third generation, very similar to the evolution of the royal family in Saudi Arabia, as we see today, the third generation taking over. And we all know from a governance point of view, family governance point of view, that's where problems happen. So the issue of governance, which was a should in the last 20 years, now it's becoming a must, otherwise we will face what Jan illustrated in the last slide of the watch. So those are the three things which we are focusing on from a legacy planning point of view.
David, I'll just pass on, down. Second question?
So just to put some figures around the comment that's just been made, according to the Gulf Family Business Council, something like just over 30% of businesses make it to the third generation successfully. Now, you've got to put that into perspective. That's not just a family problem, because obviously if you're a patriarch, you want this to continue. But it's a problem for the national economy, because so much of wealth here is family wealth, whereas in Europe or the United States, the wealth is institutional wealth. So getting this right is a crucial issue, not just for families here, but for the economies as well. And some of the things we'll be talking about later will give you some idea of the tools that are becoming available to do it here, because the other point that flows really from the last speaker's comment is that going to Europe and thinking you can do it all in the Channel Islands or Luxembourg ignores the tax structures and systems in Europe, and more importantly ignores the fact that privacy is basically being destroyed in Europe. And the European Parliament basically now is controlled by people who don't believe in privacy. That may or may not be a good thing. It's not for me to comment on it. But I think most people here who've got a lot of money take the view that privacy is something of very real value. And the solutions that may have been available elsewhere are now ceasing to be available.
I'm just going to evolve the question so it doesn't become too repetitive. Right, so the question we asked the audience was, when you talk to your clients about exciting topics like CRS and tax, do you think they really understand the reality of their situation? And 100% of people said no.
I would say I agree with that. So there's a lot of fear and lack of understanding on the regulatory wave from the US and Europe that is extraterritorial and has an impact on people in the region, many of whom have structures in Europe and in the US. So it's very important for them to be properly advised, and obviously one of the things we're talking about today is developing knowledge and understanding of these things and issues before they hit them. One of the things that I've seen in my work is that a lot of families are using legacy structures. They're using old structures which don't work anymore, and half the job, sometimes more than half the job that we end up doing is unpicking, undoing, and recreating structures that are fit for purpose for the future. And that's one of the common themes that I've seen. Very complicated, offshore, spider's web type structures, individual assets being held in individual SPVs, and it becomes very, very difficult for them to manage the risk, tax and regulatory risk.
So what you're saying is all that needs to be simplified or refreshed, is that right?
Refreshed, for sure. Sometimes the structures may have been appropriate 20 years ago, but the family's assets have evolved, their business, their strategy, the family, the generations that are in the second or third generations. So the first step is always to do a refresh, to understand how the business or the family has